Biblical leaders. We always finish off with referring back to the Bible, and we're going through this season of looking at leadership lessons from Luke. And as we were talking about this controlling the controllables and all our topics we had today of like all these changes and everything happening in our worlds, Dr. Rod actually suggested that we share from First Luke. From Luke 1, verses 1 to 4. I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Rod, if you want to take this out and see how we can learn to be better leaders from Luke.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Craig. Craig asked me if I had any ideas for our little segment on leadership lessons from Luke, and I thought, well, why don't I go to the very first verse and see what he has to say for himself? And this is what he says. Now, just by way of background, Luke, of course, was not one of the original disciples. Our understanding from the writings of Paul and others is that he was a Gentile. He was certainly a companion of Paul's, and most authorities would agree that Luke wrote both the Gospel, that goes by his name, and also the book of Acts. And so there is a kind of theme running through both the book of Luke and through Acts as well. But this is what Luke says right at the beginning of his gospel. And I'm reading from my large print Bible, which I can actually see. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, that's really a reference to all the prophecies about the Messiah coming to pass. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. So he's saying, well, okay, there were eyewitnesses, and now he says this: it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus. So Theophilus was the intended audience of the original writing. Then he says that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. So the key words here is that Luke took it upon himself to write an orderly account. And this speaks to me of research. So number one, Luke wasn't one of the original eyewitnesses of the ministry of Jesus, but he clearly came to know about it as a Gentile because of the stories that eyewitnesses had presented to him, or those who were once or twice removed from the original eyewitnesses. There was probably not a lot documented at the time that he wrote, although there would certainly have been something of the Gospels circulating around the churches at the time. So he undoubtedly interviewed people. So he did his research, that's pretty clear, but he also assembled everything to create what he called an orderly account. And I think there's an important lesson there for us as leaders. We're responsible as leaders to do our research. In other words, to know what's what, to know the facts, to gain knowledge, and obviously to process it through our Christian biblical worldview, and to seek God's wisdom as well. And I really love the idea of making it or putting it into an orderly account. Why an orderly account? So people can understand it.
Yeah,
an orderly account implies good communication. And leadership is probably 80% good communication. So I think this lesson is something we can take from the book of Luke, and we only have to read the first four verses to get that lesson.
I love that, Dr. Rod. And kind of to tie that into everything else that we've been talking today is, like, obviously we talk about Andrew Tate being caught up in jail in a foreign country and doesn't know. Well, it's important that he and his legal team and everything like that do the research and then present their findings in an orderly account, right? You know, when we're talking about the City Mardi Gras, when Dr. Rod said we need to be able to stand up for what we believe in, we can't do that effectively if we haven't done our research. we can't actually, I do a lot of communication training, especially with leadership. It's very, very true. But one of my past partnerships was specializing in training professional speakers. And one of the things I used to say to people is, if you can't write it down, you can't speak it out. So often we kind of go, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to talk about, and then just go to talk about that thing without having written it down first. Before all of these things, I research, I read through all the articles, and then I make myself some dot points. I write it down of my thoughts so that we can, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's off the cuff, because as Dr. Rod and I discuss, we come up with different ideas, and that's the great thing about this format, is it's just pretty much a conversation. But if we're to have a voice in the town square, we must have an orderly account, because we want to have that influence over people. Don't have apathy. I think that's probably the right word for it. Don't just bury your head in the sand and just think that this whole thing is going to go away and someone else will deal with it. No. You need to stand up for what God has called you to stand up for. And that happens, as Luke says, by taking an orderly account, doing that research. We talk about ChatGPT and being, that's the changes in AI that is happening. You have to do the research, and you have to be able to present to your team what that means. I'm discussing almost on a weekly basis. I'm talking with my team of like, okay, now I've got some new information. Now this is what it looks like. And we're kind of working it out as we go along so that we can present it in a way that it makes sense. Obviously we're talking about this Asbury University president changing the way that the public facing of this revival. The way he presented it, you could tell he presented it with an orderly account. He did his research. He got his advice. He took all things into consideration and then presented it forward. And as Dr. Rod said, when at first he was disappointed, and then after he heard it, he's like, okay, you know what? That actually makes sense. And so see how much of a difference that can make, where you could be presenting something that is quite controversial, like cancelling a revival, and not present it in an orderly account, and it just comes across wrong and has a different impact. Whereas as Dr. Rod was impacted, he's like, actually, no, I get this. Like, I get this. I understand this, and now we can move forward with it. So I think when you recommended that, Dr. Rod, I just thought it stood out perfectly for what we're talking about today, because we as leaders need to take the time, and Luke did, and that was the that's the whole thing about Luke is actually the longest gospel. And if you look at Luke and Acts, it is actually the longest representation of that whole journey. And it's because he took his time to research and write it down, and invested a lot of money, because he was a physician, he was a doctor. So he had money behind him, and he was able to invest in that, because it's important for us to invest in what we call to. Invest in our own learning, invest in our education, so that we can present things in an orderly account, as Luke writes. Dr. Rod, do you have any last thoughts about that at all?
No, look, except to reiterate the comment that you made about the importance of preparation. As leaders, we owe it to the people we influence and the people we are empowering to be well prepared. So if we're leading a meeting, it is important that we've done our research, we've done our reading. For example, I chair the board of a charity here on the Gold Coast. We had a board meeting this morning. The board meeting couldn't have run well if I hadn't been well prepared, if I didn't know what was in all the papers, if I hadn't read through all of the financial documentation, had a look at all the papers we were going to discuss, and so on. So if you're in that kind of formal role, it really is important that you do your preparation beforehand. I used to teach Bible college students, I still do, but some years ago I used to teach public speaking. And one of the little quips I used to often say, listen, there's only one thing better than anointed presentation, and that's anointed presentation backed up by anointed preparation. So there you go. You can have that one for free.
I love that. Anointed presentation is only better with anointed preparation. That is great. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.